Our next speaker is Ann Cooper. Ann Cooper is an all-around coffee expert that built herself a life that so many coffee professionals dream of. She's a certified Q grader with a full-on experience in being a barista, barista trainer, cafe manager, cafe owner, head roaster, and consultant. Today, she's a world-recognized coffee roasting consultant with 27 years of experience on her belt. Oh, in her spare time, she also volunteers, teaches, judges, competes, and travels to international coffee events across the globe to teach the world how to roast better.
So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Ann Cooper.
Thank you. Okay. Hello. So yeah, my name is Ann Cooper. I'm a coffee roasting consultant based in Melbourne, Australia, with almost 27, almost 30 years in the industry. Definitely, working as a barista in the cafes, and then moving through into competitions, and then moving through very much more into behind the scenes, into roasting, production, and now into training. And I would say in that time, I've definitely had the opportunity to use and experience many of the evolutions and changes that we've seen in technology, but none so much as what we've experienced in the last couple of years. We've had to endure lots of change, and we've been expected to be consistent, but also pivot and change as we deal with climate change, inflation, supply and freight delays, everything that's been coming along as an impact of the pandemic. Now, the last couple of years has also highlighted our industry as a bit of an MVP of the pandemic, you could say. In compared to other industries, it was able to perform relatively well with all of the interruptions and lockdowns. And basically, that brings us a lot of new attention onto our industry from other industries that didn't perform so well during the pandemic. So our industry, with a low to no barrier to entry, we've seen a resurgence in demand for equipment and especially in education. And that's where I come into play. I really need to make sure that I'm pretty much across everything in the industry and all different sizes of businesses. And so with that, we have lots of newcomers to the industry, and I want to make sure that they receive the appropriate training and advice, learning best practices, and they're really aware of the reality of what they really want to get into with their roasting. So I'm very much the boots on the ground, dealing with the end user perspectives, because with these newcomers, they have the idea, they're like, I like to drink coffee, I'm going to get into roasting. How hard can it be? And so we have the dreamers. It's not working. Oh, there we go. It wasn't pressing hard enough. Sorry about that. So we have very much those that think it's all about, sitting on the dryer, romantically smelling the coffee, when really, as we know, it's very much about, it's hard work, and it's very, very intense. So it's my job to be as sustainable as possible with the quality of education that these people receive with their roasting. And it's not just the newcomers, it's also within the industry. We're dealing with a lot of, whether it's people that have had to move companies, they're dealing with new technology, new product lines, but we're also dealing with business owners and managers, people that were working on their business, they're now expected to be working in their business. And they're getting an idea about that they may have invested some of the best technology, but if they don't have an idea of how to troubleshoot and keep their systems in track, if they don't know the basics. So we're all searching for information and the right education. And then it's really highlighting there's still a minefield of misinformation out there. And then that leads to any unnecessary angst and stress and lack of decisiveness, which leads to poor practices and wasteful, unsustainable practices in our industry. Which is then, it's really unnecessarily crippling what should be quite a logical process. Roasting is very logical, and especially with some basic standards in place. This will allow us to be more sustainable and to better implement any changes in technology that come our way. So what do I mean by all of this? Let me give you some examples. So we have 2 roasters. We have Cyrus and Ben. So Cyrus has more than 10 years in the industry. He has only ever worked for large corporations, and he's very much just a roaster operator. Large company, roasting tons and tons of coffee every day, every week. And then we have Ben, very small roaster, wants to sort of perfect his craft before moving on to anything bigger. But neither of them know how to roast. Think about that. So Cyrus. As a result of the pandemic, we saw a lot of big companies losing volume. And then as a result, that meant less coffee to roast, less hours for Cyrus. So he's looking for a second roasting job, and he's being rejected from a lot of those positions that he's looking for because he's realised he doesn't know how to roast. He doesn't know how to create a profile. He's never doesn't know how. He knows how to keep a roaster on track, but he's never been involved in any QC practices. He's never been involved in understanding what goes into creating the products that he's been roasting for so many years. So he comes along to me to my roasting course, and he's realised that he doesn't know how to roast. So he comes to my roasting course to learn how to roast and to learn QC practices. After 10 years roasting or operating machines. And then we have Ben. So Ben thought he was very on track. He's read the books, watched the videos, he's done all the online courses, but there was something he just wasn't quite sure about with his coffee. So of course, gets me in to come and have a look. He thinks it was going to be a very quick process. And he's not really sure about what's going on. He thought there would be a few tweaks, to be done here and there. So I go and see Ben, we taste his coffee, we calibrate, we have a look at his setup. There's a few red flags that pop up, but it's important that he shows me what he's doing. So we start roasting, and I sort of start getting ready to prepare, taking some notes, and then I stop and ask and go, what's happening? Oh, the beans are cracking. They always crack at this point. It was 3 minutes into the roast. And what happens next? Oh, well, I just hold the beans in the roaster because, for 10 minutes, because I was told that I'm supposed to do a 10-minute roast. Well, that explains a lot of what I'm tasting. So this is what Ben's profile looks like. And I mean, it's symmetrical, and the rate of rise is somewhat declining. You've got to give him that. But more than anything, and also too, if you want to do every possible defect in a roast, you can do it with this profile. But very much, when I'm consulting, it's really important that I don't show too much. So I would definitely say it's definitely a situation of the poker face was very, very strong that day. I really had to keep everything internal, but my mind was just exploding with, oh my God, this is fabulous. I've never seen anything like this before. But how do I tell Ben that he's doing everything wrong? Who told him he was doing everything right? Who am I to walk in and also tell him that he's doing things wrong? So it really made me really aware of what I know about roasting and really questioning myself. So by showing and proving to Ben and helping him improve. So unfortunately, it was quite soul-destroying to tell Ben that he pretty much had to start all over again. And ironically, his business was called Soul City Roasting. So it wasn't a very good situation to be in. But really, if both Cyrus and Ben had a better understanding of roasting for what it really is, then they would have been better able to embrace the technology they were using, which then sort of, begs us to ask, what is roasting? It's kind of like, what is roasting? It's like that guy on TikTok that points out the obvious. Roasting is really, it's the green to brown. It's the basics. But really, as we know, it can be subjective. But we just need to practice and just get better at calling those physical changes and those physical events. But what crushes my soul is there's a lot of direction out there, and we're told to ignore looking at the coffee, that it's not a good practice, that it's old school. But really, and of course we need to be strategic about when we look at the coffees. But in terms of challenges and changes and embracing evolutions in technology, it's the one constant. It's the one thing that will always be there, the green to brown. And it brings up the whole adage of also, when do I look at the coffee in the roaster? When do I look at the data on the screen? Because, and it happens to the best of us, what happens when your software freezes and glitches? you're going to pick up a timer, and you're going to look at the coffee, and you're going to work out where you are on the roast, and you're going to make great decisions about how to get yourself out of that roast and finish it. Because if you know how to then, follow the physical changes in the roast, knowing how to follow the coffee will essentially teach you how to use your roaster. So when I first started roasting, I was first introduced to Probat, and it was on a beautiful reconditioned G45. And the technician that did the work on the machine basically came in to do some updates on the software. And he'd never met me before, and he just basically came in and said, and he was like, "Who are you? What are you doing on my roaster? Do you know how to roast? Because any monkey can follow a line on the screen." And I was like, "Good day to you too. I'm all good. Go for it." So he proceeds to turn the screen around and pretends to do some maintenance on the roaster, but all the whole while he was watching to see I knew what to do on the roaster. So basically, also seeing was I worthy to be on his machine. But in the sense, he was really testing my sensory skills, which when I think back on it was, quite something I really quite value. So imagine if roasters like Ben and Cyrus, or any newcomers really that are coming, actually all of us in the industry, if we had a better understanding of the basics of green to brown, we will all be more decisive with our roasting. So once this understanding, these basics are established in terms of timing of key events, physical changes, we're able to then better create some standards, some cooking strategies, some profile strategies in line with an intended roast level, a specific product, and of course, cultural palate. So what do I mean by all of this? It's all about the linear progression, the timing of the green to brown. So it's not about the lines on the screen. So we've got to remember that this is more so our intellectual property. If a competitor walks into your roastery, don't worry about the lines on the screen, worry about those phases, because that can be translated to any machine. So taking inspiration very much from cupping and brewing, I'm really quite passionate about, you would think that a lot of us in this room, we understand how to approach a cupping because we've been taught how to do that. We know how to set it up. We know how to go through the whole process. Why can't we have the same for roasting? So if we have some suggested baseline approaches to start with, then that will really help alleviate any unnecessary or any unsustainable practices across all levels of experience, and especially by initially not knowing what to do. I would definitely say two of the most unsustainable practices across all levels of experience and even sizes of business is seasoning a new roaster and dialing in a new coffee. Especially now with inflation and the price of green being so high, we cannot afford to be wasting anything. Being told to burn coffee for seasoning is an incredibly privileged, unsustainable practice that should be more efficient in its application. It should be more of an exploratory process where we're taking the time to better understand our roasters, we're learning batch sizes, we're creating data points, we're using it to learn everything about our roasters while still producing something that's usable and we're not throwing it away. And of course, with dialing in, we've all heard a roaster say, my last roast was my best roast. It doesn't have to be like that. It should be your first roast. But with defining these flavours, standards, we need help from science. And it's really pleasing to hear, Bill talk about, that there's potential for that happening, because if I've thought about it, I really hope that, organisations like UC Davis are thinking about that and working on that. Instead of using, because this is my approach, this is anecdotal experience at the moment. So, which to a point, as was pointed out earlier, it's not quite trusted, it's not quite believed. But we could have some definitive science to support these suggested baseline profile standards, which will really help newcomers start the right way and lead to more sustainable, decisive roasting, as well as being able to then adapt any innovations that come our way. And it's not about doing things the same way. Cultural palate will pretty much take care of that. It's about giving roasters a successful starting point. They don't have to like it, but at least they know how it was created and how they would change it if required. And it also, as mentioned earlier, it really helps cement your intellectual property, because this can be translated across machines. So with a baseline standard, this is where digitisation comes into play, because we need these standards, we need these strategies in order to create data and our checkpoints and our profiles. It becomes a symbiotic relationship. We need the basics in order to manage the technology. So data needs sensory. Sensory needs data in order to create standards. Standards then allow a seamless adaptation to evolutions in digitisation and technology. Data drives knowledge, and knowledge results in more decisive and sustainable roasting practices. So it's all about showing ourselves with the right data. And that data is what is going all the way, what's connected to the green to brown, the physical changes, the physical events. We're assigning a data point to a physical event. So we roast, we record, we're recording all those key data points, we taste, we analyse, it's a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and then we highlight whatever it is that we really, really like, and then we know what contributed to those flavours and how we did it on our specific equipment. We're showing ourselves why we like it and how we created it. So we do all this data collection, and then for a while we kind of ask ourselves, well, what do we do with all of this data? We create parameters, which is I just love, this is what roasting data and parameters is what it's all about. So this is where we can end up with all of our data points, is whether it's in line with a roast level or a specific product, we're creating these endpoint parameters so we can better define our roasting. So I'm super excited to hear and learn more about FabScale and the end goal of creating those parameters. And it's definitely the way to tie everything together in order to be more consistent and yet pivot and evolve, with technology. So to create parameters, best practice is to summarise all of your favourite roasts, collate common data points, recognise patterns in your data, and that will then support your favourite flavours and then relate to a specific product. It really helps to strengthen decisiveness and keeps roasting teams, specific products on track. It also helps to create a range in data points, which is really important for roasting. I'm sure there's some of us in the room, when you sort of first start learning how to roast, there's a pursuit for perfection. That pursuit for perfection is incredibly unsustainable. It does produce waste, unnecessary waste. So we need to give ourselves a bit of room to move around with our data points. And yes, everything that we've sort of spoken about so far in terms of the green to brown, identifying data points, creating parameters, is something that I do with all of my clients, regardless of experience. It's super important that they get that very real experience and aspect of roasting. And then with standards and parameters in place, then we can easily embrace any new evolutions in technology that evolve over time. So, like a lot of us, we all started, with as we moved on through the years, starting with very hands-on, very manual controlled style of roasting, to now with more of that sort of digital, automated systems, and there's always pros and cons. One of the most common comments that I come across about digitisation or even automation in general is that they take away an element of control and creativity. But in a day and age right now, we need our customers more than ever. And we're using automation will really allow us to stay consistent for our customers. But it also does somewhat make us a little bit less likely to keep an eye on the coffee, a little bit less complacent with the basics, and a loss of sensory judgment kind of does prevail. So we tend to rely on the technology, maybe a bit too much. So when the technology fails, we're unable to step in and use our sensory senses or judgment to really help fix the situation. Kind of like what happened to Cyrus. The only other big con I would say with automation and digitisation is the ergonomics, the design, the interface. Is the system logical? Is it intuitive to use? And if not, it can really cause much angst for the end user and operator and roaster. It will make the whole process very unenjoyable, possibly encouraging unsustainable, wasteful practices as well by focusing on the wrong information and the wrong data. Because I often have to ask roasters, are you roasting the machine or are you roasting the beans in the roaster? It's very important to recognise that at the right time. But an overwhelming pro in today's current climate, again, is for consistency. We're dealing with skill and labour shortages, but we still need to allow our businesses, our roasters, business owners to work on and in their business whilst dealing with all of the changes and challenges that are coming our way from the pandemic, provided there's a baseline standard and parameters are understood and in place. The key to because this is the key to implementing and managing all evolutions in technology. Overall, our industry is very much driven by cultural palate. We're in the business of flavour. We're creating something to be tasted. It's very much then facilitated by data and technology, but it's also fueled and sustained by producers. We must do better at the business of roasting. It's all about the next generation. Because if we're not sustainable with our businesses and our roasting practices, then we will not have a business to be able to support our producers. We really need to really understand the impact back to the producers is quite huge. I mean, how do we tell producers like Maristella that you won't be able to buy the coffee she specifically processed for you because you didn't run your business properly or sustainably? I will always be the voice of reason and support for manufacturers and producers. I will never let a roaster get away with blaming the machine and or the green without really fully understanding or assessing their own skills, their knowledge, their level of understanding and their practices. And so along with all the changes, challenges and evolutions in technology coming our way, we must never forget about the beans rolling around in our roasters. Because without those hands, without those coffee cherries and the seeds inside, absolutely none of us would be here today. Now that's the reality of roasting. Thank you so much today, and I really look forward to many great conversations with you all and learning from you all over the next few days. And thank you so much to Probat for having me.